The room wasn't just quiet. It was holding its breath. A Senate hearing chamber, grand and austere. Marble columns reached upward like monuments to power. Dark walnut desks gleamed beneath sterile white light. The silence wasn't natural, it was enforced. Reporters adjusted their ties. Staffers whispered in corners, glancing at their phones for last-minute cues. Cameras, 12 of them, were lined like soldiers waiting. Every lens focused on the table at the center, the battlefield. And at one end sat a man who was used to winning long before the fight began. Alan Dershowitz, a name that still commanded reverence and fear in legal circles. A former Harvard law professor with 5 decades of courtroom dominance under his belt. He had advised presidents, dismantled prosecutors, and walked out of televised debates without a single scratch. To many in the room, he wasn't just a lawyer. He was the law. His navy blue suit was flawless. His posture, military sharp. Hands folded, eyes alert, mouth curved into a smile that wasn't quite a smile. The kind of expression worn by men who believe they've already won. And maybe in his mind he had. After all, across from him sat a woman younger by a generation. A freshman congresswoman. No Ivy League resume, no big-name clerking job. To him, she was just a moment, he was a legacy. And legacies don't lose, right? What Dershowitz didn't realize was that he wasn't walking into a lecture hall. He was walking into a storm. Because on the other side of that table was a woman who didn't carry the weight of institutions. She carried the weight of injustice, of eviction notices, of denied ballots, of courtrooms where justice was a luxury, not a guarantee. She didn't wear legacy. She wore lived experience. And in less than 10 minutes, she would leave a mark that even Harvard couldn't erase. But in this moment, before a single word had been spoken, all anyone could feel was the tension pulling tight like a wire ready to snap. Something was coming, and the man who had silenced hundreds before was about to be silenced himself. And then she walked in. Not with a trail of reporters, not with a team of assistants carrying briefcases. She didn't need the fanfare. She brought something heavier, purpose. Jasmine Crockett entered the chamber like a scalpel, sharp, silent, and deliberate. No designer heels, no tailored 3-piece power suit. Just a navy blazer, a white blouse, and eyes that didn't flinch. Where Dershowitz was polished, she was precise. Where he carried prestige, she carried presence. The contrast wasn't subtle. It was seismic. She sat across from him like she'd been there 1,000 times before. No nerves, no hesitation. She didn't speak a word, and yet the room tilted. You could feel it. As if the cameras, the microphones, even the air itself shifted its attention. There was something in the way she sat down. Shoulders steady, chin lifted, pen in hand, but she wasn't writing. She was watching, observing the man across from her, not with fear, but with the quiet recognition of someone who's been underestimated all her life and learned to turn it into fuel. This wasn't just a debate. This was a reckoning decades in the making. He waited for the moment, the kind of moment that men like Alan Dershowitz live for, when the cameras were focused, when the room leaned in, when one sentence could carve headlines before the ink dried, and then he struck. Do you even understand constitutional law, Ms. Crockett? It wasn't a question. It was a surgical insult wrapped in fake curiosity. He said it slowly, deliberately, like a teacher scolding a student, like a judge belittling a rookie attorney. The smirk returned to his lips. He tapped his pen once, twice, confident that the blow had landed. For a second, the room reacted exactly the way he wanted. A few chuckles from the back. Whispers rippled like a wave. Some staffers, mostly on his side of the aisle, nodded as if relieved to see the professor reassert his dominance. And for a brief moment, it looked like he had her. Like this was just another academic exercise for Dershowitz. One more verbal takedown to add to his long list of trophies. But then she blinked. Once. And what happened next, no one in the room saw coming. She didn't blink twice. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She simply placed her pen down. Not forcefully, not dramatically, but deliberately with the precision of a closing gavel. That single motion echoed louder than any shouted reply. It was the sound of self-control, the sound of someone who knew exactly what was coming and wasn't the least bit shaken. The room didn't know what to do with that silence. A second passed, then 2. The air grew thicker. Even the cameras for a moment stopped adjusting. Jasmine Crockett didn't speak. She held the moment hostage, and in doing so, she flipped the power. Because while Alan Dershowitz expected fire, she gave him something worse. She gave him stillness. That unbearable, unnerving stillness before a storm hits, when you know it's coming. When you know the sky's about to split open and all you can do is wait. In that silence, you could almost hear it, the collective breath being held, the anticipation pulsing through the room like electricity. Everyone was waiting for the explosion. But Jasmine, she was waiting for her moment. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't match insult with insult. Instead, she opened her mouth and told a story. His name was MOCKS. He was 22 years old. He'd been arrested because he fell behind on rent by $78. The room froze. He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't know what a summary judgment was, and the night before his court date, he slept in his car. Not because he wanted to, but because he didn't have a home to sleep in anymore. There was no outrage in her voice, just reality, plain, undeniable, and devastating. I stayed up that night, she continued, not to write an op-ed, not to prepare for a TV debate, but to research loopholes in the local housing code, to fight for a kid no one would ever write about. She paused, just for a second. But it was enough. The silence that had once been heavy now felt holy. People weren't just listening, they were absorbing. Because in that moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't sound like a politician. She sounded like someone who had been there. Not in theory, in reality, in midnight court filings, in shaking hands outside courtroom doors, in the quiet desperation of people society leaves behind. She didn't need a Harvard degree to validate her voice. Her scars spoke louder, and then she delivered it. No pause, no build-up, no theatrics, just one sentence. A law degree is only as powerful as the justice it produces. The words dropped like a hammer, not loud, but final. The kind of truth that doesn't need volume because it carries weight. And in that exact moment, the cameras began to move. Slow, deliberate, searching. One lens zoomed in right onto Alan Dershowitz's face. His expression didn't collapse. It fractured, just slightly, but enough. His jaw clenched. The corner of his smirk twitched. His pen stopped tapping. For the first time in decades, Alan Dershowitz didn't have a comeback. No quote, no clever dismissal, only silence. A silence that belonged to her. Jasmine Crockett hadn't yelled. She hadn't raised a fist. She hadn't thrown credentials or name-dropped elite institutions. She just told the truth. And the truth spoke louder than his entire or some. It took less than 45 seconds. The clip. The moment Jasmine Crockett looked Alan Dershowitz in the eye and said, "A law degree is only as powerful as the justice it produces." It was uploaded to TikTok before the hearing even ended. Then it hit Twitter, then YouTube Shorts, then everywhere. By the end of the day, it had over 6.2 million views across platforms. By morning, it had doubled. The hashtags came fast. Sword for Justice, hashtag Crockett versus Dershowitz, hashtag Prestige is not purpose. And with them came the voices. Law students, public defenders, first-gen graduates, single moms, young activists, veterans, teachers, even judges. One after another, they reposted the clip. Some added tears, some added applause, some simply typed, "Finally, someone said it." A young woman from Detroit stitched the clip on TikTok and whispered, "I thought I didn't belong in law school until I heard her." A man from Georgia wrote, "I served overseas. But it wasn't until today I saw justice served in a Senate hearing." This wasn't just viral. It was visceral. It wasn't just trending. It was transforming. And Alan Dershowitz, he wasn't the headline. She was. The chamber had heard enough. Enough Latin phrases, enough credentials, enough recycled reverence for Ivy League institutions. And Jasmine Crockett. She felt it, so she stood her ground, took a breath, and delivered one of the most devastating lines in the room's history. "If your degree defends power, then mine defends people." Boom. No yelling, no mic drop, just a truth so sharp it cut through the marble walls. And for a moment, there was stillness. And then it happened. Clap, one, then two, then an unmistakable ripple of hands meeting palms. Applause, not wild, not chaotic, but measured, earned, the kind of applause that isn't for performance, it's for principle. Even some who had leaned toward Dershowitz now looked down, uncomfortable, quiet, because this wasn't just about law anymore. It was about what the law is supposed to protect. And for the first time in that hearing, prestige was losing. Dershowitz wasn't done. He adjusted his tie, leaned into the mic, and tried to reclaim the room. But something had changed. His words, once crisp, commanding, now wandered. Let me quote Cicero, a Roman statesman who once said, "Stop." The air didn't shift. People weren't nodding anymore. They were checking their watches. He tried again. The Harvard Law Review published a compelling case in 1978. Still no response, no spark, no echo, only silence and the faint sound of his prestige fading. Because in that moment, it became clear he was no longer arguing. He was performing. And the crowd, they'd already moved on. They weren't hungry for citations. They wanted connection. They wanted accountability. In Dershowitz. He was still trying to win a debate when he'd already lost the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked on Dershowitz, the room frozen in place. How many lives, she said, did your Harvard lectures ever save? No one moved? No cough, no whisper, not even a breath. Because in that one question, Jasmine didn't just challenge his argument. She challenged his legacy. And for the first time all night, Dershowitz had no answer. It started as a moment. But moments when true, they become movements. Jasmine Crockett's voice had pierced the ivory towers. And for the first time, students from community colleges, waitresses pulling double shifts, mothers in public housing, they looked at a courtroom and saw someone like them. Not elite, not polished, but real, sharp, brave, tired, honest. Clips of her comeback flooded TikTok. Edits turned her words into anthems. A single frame, her stare, her calm became a symbol. No longer just a congresswoman, now she was a mirror reflecting every unheard voice that had ever been shut out of the room. The courtroom was silent, but outside the ground had already begun to shake. Alan Dershowitz, once a titan of constitutional law, was no longer untouchable. Not after that question. How many lives did your Harvard lectures ever save? It echoed. In law schools, on podcasts, in barbershops. And suddenly, young lawyers, professors, even judges began to ask what they had never dared to before. What is the true value of a law degree if it only protects the powerful? Old notions cracked. Justice, no longer wrapped in Latin phrases in mahogany halls, was now wearing sneakers, speaking with clarity, and sitting beside the people. Dershowitz still had his titles, his degrees, his books, but legacy was shifting. Toward Crockett, toward courage, toward something real. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument. She redefined what it means to be a lawyer in the 21st century. It's no longer about Latin phrases etched in textbooks. Not about clerking for Supreme Court justices or sipping champagne at Ivy League galas. Today, being a lawyer means standing in the fire for those who have no shelter. It means wielding the law like a sword, not to protect the privileged, but to shield the forgotten. Crockett's victory wasn't measured in applause. It was measured in awakening, in every student who felt unseen, in every public defender who was told they'd never matter, in every girl who grew up thinking a law degree was too far to reach. She didn't just carry a degree, she carried destiny. And for the first time, the world finally saw that maybe the future of justice wasn't wearing robes, but braids, heels, and a fire that could melt ivory towers. And when the lights dimmed, when the camera crews packed up and the echo of that courtroom finally faded, what remained wasn't a winner, but a wound reopened, a truth uncovered, a legacy rewritten. Alan Dershowitz walked out with his degree intact. Jasmine Crockett walked out with something heavier, the weight of a generation watching. And yet she never bowed, because in a world where credentials scream, courage whispers. And sometimes it's the whisper that moves mountains. Truth doesn't need prestige. It needs a voice and the courage to speak. This wasn't just a courtroom clash. It was a cultural reset. Jasmine Crockett didn't just stand up to a legal legend. She reminded us that degrees don't define justice. People do. Too often we're told we're not qualified enough, not Ivy League, not connected, not loud enough. But Crockett proved something powerful. You don't need a fancy title to stand for something real. You just need guts, grit, and a reason that matters. So whether you're from a small town, a regular school, or just starting out, never underestimate your voice. Because in a world full of noise, sometimes it's the quiet conviction that breaks the system wide open. If this story hits you in the chest, if you've ever been underestimated, talked down to, or told to know your place, if you believe that courage should speak louder than credentials, hit that subscribe button right now. Every subscription helps amplify voices that usually get ignored. It fuels stories that shake the system and lift people up. Be part of a community that believes in truth, justice, and the power of standing your ground. Because this isn't just content, this is a movement.